So we can continue where we left off yesterday. So we left off yesterday at discussing, what is samsara? The definition of samsara being the continuum of rebirth again and again of the contaminated aggregates. So actually, because all of our contaminated aggregates, our body and mind, are part of that continuum, then actually our body and mind, including our feelings, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, they are all part of samsara. They are samsara. So samsara is something that is within our continuum in that way. So yesterday we discussed what samsara is, and then different kinds of dependent arising, the importance of studying, understanding dependent arising, and why, and some different reasons why past and future lives are possible, and some evidence from Western kind of perspective, Western science, for the existence of past and future lives. So this morning, before we look at the actual diagram, again, you're probably wondering when are we ever going to look at the diagram, because there's so many things to go before. But I wanted to read this, just briefly read this this passage from the Rice Seedling Sutra. So the Buddha taught the 12 links of dependent arising in both the Pali Canon and also in the Sanskrit Canon. So it's part of the Hinayana and also the Mahayana presentation of Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings. And it's said that on the night that Buddha actually achieved enlightenment, when he was like 36 years old, then one of the main things he realized was these 12 links of dependent arising, and how beings take rebirth in samsara through the force of ignorance and afflictive emotions, and therefore how it's possible to escape samsara by generating the wisdom that refutes or eliminates ignorance, this fundamental ignorance. So in the Sanskrit canon, though, the main sutra, which is a source for the 12 links of dependent arising, is called the Rice Seedling Sutra. There's also a sutra of dependent arising, but the Rice Seedling Sutra is the main one. So I'll just read you this short passage from the Rice Seedling Sutra. So he says, so this is Shakyamuni Buddha speaking. He says, Venerable Bhikshus, whoever sees dependent and relative origination sees the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. What is this dependent and relative origination of which I speak? It is this. Because this exists, that arises. Because that is born, then this is born. So I'll just read it again. Venerable Bhikshus, whoever sees dependent and relative origination, or dependent arising, sees the Dharma. So the Dharma, the Dharma can mean like the Buddha's teachings. It can also mean the truth, just what is most true. So it says, whoever sees dependent and relative origination sees the Dharma. So they see the truth, or they see the essence of the Buddha's teachings, or the essence of spiritual teachings. And whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So it kind of also saying, if you don't really understand the truth of what the Buddha taught, then you don't really see the Buddha. You don't understand what it means to be the Buddha. I mean, we can talk about Buddha, the person, and do this, and he was from there and that, but without understanding the essence of what he taught, then you're not really seeing what the Buddha is. So he says, whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. And then he asks, what is this dependent and relative origination of which I speak? It is this. So what does he mean by dependent origination or dependent arising? It means, because this exists, then that arises. Because this is born, because this is produced, then that is produced. So the main thing he's talking about is actually, there's different kinds of dependent arising, but here, the main one he refers to is of cause and effect. Because there's a certain set of causes and conditions that come together, then their natural result is produced. Right? And because those causes have been produced in the past, then their results are produced in the future. And then those results, anything which is a result is also a cause. Cause and effect are synonymous, actually. Well, they're not synonymous because they mean different things. Like a cause means it produces an effect, it produces something. Like a microwave produces heat, or someone put together mud and fire and glazed and fired this object, and then it became a porcelain cup, right? Or our parents, came together in sexual union and then produced us as a person. Or, when we hear sounds, then that produces, when we hear words being spoken, then that produces understanding in our mind of the meaning of those words. So everything that produces an effect is a cause. And so cause means something that produces an effect. An effect means it's something that's been produced by a cause. It's the thing that's being produced, right? But actually everything that is an effect, everything that has arisen from a cause, it also produces subsequent effects, right? Because it changes through time. Everything that's been produced by its causes and conditions, its nature is to change or to momentarily disintegrate, is the definition of impermanence. So its nature is to change. So because it changes, then in the very next moment it's produced something else. The former moment has produced a subsequent moment, right? So you can even think like us, we've been sitting here we've been, in this room together probably for like 20 minutes, right? So although there's different ways to think about us as a person. We exist through time, right? So we've been existing together here in the room for 20 minutes, but each moment, each minute, we're a different person, right? Where none of us are the exact same as we were 20 minutes ago. Like every minute we're changing. We'll just refer to myself, I guess easier. The I that existed 20 minutes ago is not the same that I that exists now, although I've been existing for the whole 20 minutes, right? So in one way of thinking about us as a person, I've been existing, I'm 45 now, so from 45 years ago, right? So one way to think of us as a person is as what we label person on this whole continuum that started when we were at the time of conception, or when we were born, and lasts until now. But then within that continuum, there are many different instances of us. Like there's the us when we were 5 years old, there was the us we were when we were 10 years old, when we were 15 years old, when we were 20 years old. So each of those is an instance of us. And without each of those instances, you couldn't have the whole continuum. So like the me I was when I was 5 years old is a cause of the me that exists now, right? And the me that exists now will be a cause of the me that will exist 5 minutes from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, right? So every moment we're changing. And so that's one way to see how cause and effect are the same. Every moment of our existence, we're an effect of so many causes that have come before. Like the food we eat, the places we've gone, the people we've met, the families that we've grown up in, the things we've learned in school. So all of those are causes for what we are right now. And then everything we experience now, including externally and also internally, what we think and what we feel, are both results of everything that's come before, and are also causes of everything that will become later on. So this is just an example of how, of dependent arising, and the dependent arising of cause and effect, and how everything that is a result is also a cause. But everything that is a result, it arises because certain causes have arisen before that and given rise to that, or produced those things. Just as, because we're born into a certain family, in a certain place, in a certain time, ate certain foods, went to certain school, met certain friends, all of those things are causes to create what we are right now, right? As people. So this is how to understand dependent arising, is to look at, is one way of understanding dependent arising, to look at how things are produced by cause and effects. So what's important for us as intelligent, human beings, is to decide, what kind of causes do I want to create now? It's not like we don't have control over everything that happens in our life, but the main thing we have control over is how we use our mind, how we react to things, how we think about things, and the kind of attitudes we generate about ourselves and about others, whether we generate negative, kind of pessimistic, destructive attitudes, or whether we generate very positive, optimistic, and constructive attitudes about ourselves and others. And so depending, and that's up to us. We have some power to shape the way we think and feel and relate to ourselves and relate to other people and other things. So depending on how we use our mind now, that all becomes a cause for what we become later on. Okay, so this is the basis for the wheel of life, and then okay, so let's begin looking at the illustration now. I have some other verses that I'll come back to later. So there's an illustration on the front, and then some basic explanation on the back of this sheet you have. If you don't have a sheet, then maybe could you raise your hand? Okay, get one in your hands. You don't have this. Okay, great. So this is the wheel of life. So we start. Well, let's start with the very scary monster. Right. So there's this very wrathful. So the whole wheel of life is held in the two hands between the claws of the hands and feet, and the fangs of the mouth of the Lord of Death. He's called Yama. So he represents death. So it represents that actually this whole process of samsara is kind of trapped in. He's like the prison warden, I guess you could say. It's trapped in the fangs, or held in the grip of the Lord of Death, which means as long as you take rebirth through the force of afflictive emotions and karma, then inevitably you experience old age, suffering, and death. Right? So why death? I mean, there's also old age. Why isn't he like the Lord of old age, or Lord of sickness? It's probably because death is like the most traumatic and probably one of the most difficult things we face in our life if we don't prepare for it well. And it's one of the most tragic things, that because one of the greatest joys we have in life is, sharing time and sharing our life together with family and friends and people close to us. And then at death, we're completely separated from all of that. And because one of the things that's most precious to us is our identity, and we identify with this body, and with this appearance, and with our language, with our knowledge, with our possessions. And death tears us away from all of that. We're completely separated from all of those things that we identify as being fundamentally us. And all of a sudden, we're completely not part of that anymore, and our consciousness is going on somewhere else. So therefore, it's like one of the greatest sufferings that we can possibly experience is dying. Although the reason I hesitate, I kind of qualify that, is because it's commonly said that for an ordinary being who doesn't practice whatsoever, then death is terrifying, right? For someone who's a middling practitioner, a spiritual practitioner, death can be very peaceful. For someone who's a very high level practitioner, death is like their greatest joy. It's like incredibly joyful. It's a great opportunity to transform in a radically positive way. But this presentation is for that of a just totally ordinary being who doesn't practice. Then samsara is held in the terrifying kind of grip of the Lord of Death. So that's why he has this crown of skulls, and fire blazing from his brows, so forth, representing kind of destruction and the annihilation of the body. So then, but then we go right to the center. So let's start at the very center of the circle. What do you see at the very center of the circle? Yeah, we actually see the three animals. I'm glad you see the three poisons, but that's because you know the symbolism. So there's a pig, and a rooster, and a snake. They're right at the center. So you see, yeah. Basically, the wheel of life is made up of actually how many circles? 1, 2, 3, 4 circles, right? So the innermost represents the three poisons. The three fundamental afflictive emotions, or disturbing emotions, which are ignorance, represented by the pig. Here the pig symbolizes ignorance, and then the rooster symbolizes attachment, or greed, and then the snake represents anger. So then outside, the next circle outside represents karma. So karma arises from the three afflictive emotions. Then the next circle outside with all those the most kind of elaborate drawings is the 5 realms, or the 6 realms in which we can take rebirth. And then the outermost circle, which has 12 small illustrations, is the represents the 12 links of dependent arising. Okay. So let's start at the very center, then with the three animals, the pig, the snake, and the rooster. So here, there's two different ways to draw this illustration in the center. One is, the way it's drawn here is that you can see the, the tail of the rooster is in the mouth of the pig. The tail of the snake is sort of right by the mouth of the rooster, and the tail of the pig is in the mouth of the snake, right? So here it's, but another way to draw it is that actually the tail of the rooster and the snake are both in the mouth of the pig. So the reason for that is, so the pig represents ignorance. So the reason for drawing it a different way, that the tail of the rooster and snake both are coming from the mouth of the pig, is because the rooster represents attachment, the snake represents anger, and both of those arise from ignorance, right? So their tail being in the mouth of the pig represents that they're coming out of, like, it's not like the pig's eating them, but it's kind of like, imagine they're coming out of the mouth of the pig in a way. I mean, we can't be too literal with the interpretation, but basically, the ignorance gives rise to attachment and anger. But another way to think of it, the way it's described here is, well, actually they're kind of circular. Although ignorance is most fundamental, ignorance gives rise to attachment, which I'll explain how in just a minute. And then attachment gives rise to anger, because interestingly, I mean, it's totally true if you think about every instance of us becoming angry about something arises because we're attached to something being a certain way, and then it becomes not that way, right? So something violates our desire, and then we become angry about it, right? So in a way, it's also true that anger always arises from attachment, and then anger gives rise to further ignorance. I mean, the more attachment and the more anger we have, then those tend to thicken our ignorance. But what kind of ignorance we're talking about here is not just, the ignorance we're talking about here is not just not knowing something, right? It's not just not being aware of something, which is, I mean, is one kind of ignorance. And it's not just thinking something else other than what is the truth. It's not just knowing the ignorance here is ignorance of the most fundamental truth of reality, and especially of the way we exist as a person, the way everything else exists. So the ignorance is not just grasping at something else, but rather it's having a mistaken concept of the way we exist, right? So it's not just not knowing how we exist, but rather having an actively mistaken concept of the way we exist. So examples of this are what's some couples here? Falsehood and animosity. So just like you think of friendship, we're friends with someone. So the opposite of not being friends with someone, the opposite of being friends with someone is not just not being friends with them, but being actively having animosity towards the person, right? So the ignorance is like this. So it's like we have friendship, or friendly feelings or friendship with a person, a sense of friendship with a person. So the opposite of that is not just not being friends with a person, but rather, disliking a person. It's like the opposite of liking someone is disliking them. It's not just having an absence of liking, right? So here, the opposite of the wisdom which we need to cultivate to be free from samsara is not just not having that wisdom, but it's actually a mind which grasps at things as existing in the totally opposite way in which they exist, right? The other example Tsongkhapa gives is falsehood. Like the opposite of being honest is not just not saying anything, but rather actively deceiving someone. Okay. So here, the ignorance we're talking about, it'd take up way too much time to go into detail about it. And different Buddhist authors, different Buddhist masters of the past, present the kind of ignorance being discussed here in different ways. For example, in the Theravada tradition, they posit this kind of ignorance represented by the pig here as being ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, ignorance of the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation, and the path to the path to cessation, or the truth and the path to cessation. So ignorance of, because it's by understanding the Four Noble Truths that we can be free from samsara, free from suffering. And so ignorance of the Four Noble Truths is a kind of ignorance that keeps us trapped in samsara. Asanga posits ignorance as just the mind being obscured and just not knowing how to be free from samsara, a kind of confusion, right? Dharmakirti, he posits this ignorance as being grasping at a permanent and a self-sufficient and substantially existent self. So I know that probably doesn't mean much to you now, but it means like a kind of self that is a lord over our body and mind. Like if we look at what we are, we have a body and mind, and we have a sense that I am something that is not the body and not the mind, and is not something outside of those, but I exist somehow within my body and mind, and I control them. And there's a sense of there being this separate entity which exists somehow kind of within the body and the mind and controls those. And it has a substantial existence in and of its own right. So that's what Dharmakirti posits, but but the foremost presentation of ignorance in this school of Buddhism, generally in all the four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, is considered to be given by Nagarjuna as interpreted by Sankhya, Buddhapalita and Chandakirti. So Chandakirti says that the ignorance, which is the most fundamental source of attachment, greed, jealousy, anger, all the afflictive emotions, is rather grasping at the self as being something that is inherently existent. Means it's not dependent upon anything whatsoever, and that something that's findable when you search for it. So so it means, in short, having a sense that when we all have a sense of self. Like we have, if we think back, what did I do this morning? How did I come here? What have I been doing for the last 20 minutes? We have a sense of the self, or who am I? Where am I from? How old am I? What's my name? If we just think about ourselves in that way, we have an ordinary sense of self, and it seems like that self exists like independent of causes and conditions, independent of parts, like it's a unified entity, and especially independent of our mental concepts, independent of our labeling ourself upon our aggregates. Right? So it seems like it has a sort of existence that's of its own power, existing from its own side, without being merely labeled by the mind. Right? So that when we search for it, there's a sense of that we should be able to find something concrete that is essentially me. So what Chandakirti is saying is that no such thing exists. If you try to search for yourself, maybe we'll have time to do this meditation later, but if you try to search for yourself within your body, you can't find anything that is you. You only find parts of your body. If you try to search for what you feel is essentially you within your mind or any of your mental experiences, all you find is a collection of different mental experiences, memories and feelings and plans and thoughts and judgments and so forth. But you can't find any specific mental experience you can point to and say, that is me. Or even, one of the most tempting is the continuum of consciousness, to point to and say, that is me. But if our continuum of consciousness is us, that means nobody can see us, and we can't eat food, or we don't walk or lie down, because our continuum of consciousness doesn't do those things. So we have both physical aspects and mental aspects. So whatever we are, it has to be able to do all those things that our physical and mental aspects will do. So in short, Chandakirti is saying that we have an exaggerated sense of the reality and the concreteness of ourself, of I. Therefore, there's an exaggerated sense of distinction between what's I and what's other than I. everything else, everybody else and everything else in the world. And because we exaggerate this kind of duality between the self, that's I, and that which is other, then we divide up other into things which we like and things which we don't like, according to what we perceive as attractive and what we perceive as unattractive. And we feel like we need to possess or use things that are other than us to achieve our well-being, to protect ourselves from harm, from that which we don't like, and to get that which we like, which brings then satisfaction, to bring ourselves satisfaction. So it's based on these two kind of forces that then we generate attachment and craving and lust and desire for what we like, and we're drawn to it, and then we generate a sense of dissatisfaction when we can't get what we want, and then we generate a sense of aversion and dislike, and even anger or hatred towards things that we don't want and we don't like. And then when people or things prevent us from getting what we like, then we become angry, right? So that's how this ignorance, which is an exaggerated sense of the reality of a self, the concreteness of an I, of a self, which is actually, the self is actually just something that exists, but exists independent upon our own concepts, right? It exists, actually everything exists in that way, but it's like an illusion, in that because it appears as being much more, our sense of self appears as being something much more concrete, solid, and real than it is, right? So because we exaggerate the sense of self, then we exaggerate the duality between self and other, and then that leads to attraction and greed, desire, and then anger and aversion. So that's why these three, and those three fundamental afflictive emotions of ignorance, grasping at a self, and attachment and anger, they give rise to then actions, afflictive actions, which are karma, which produce virtuous and non-virtuous karma, which is symbolized in the second wheel. So let's just look at the second ring just outside of that center one. You see there's a white half and a dark half. So it's in the dark half, you can see there's people, and they look like they're all facing down, right? So they're all going down. So that represents, the dark shade there, it represents negative karma, right? Whereas the white half represents positive karma, or virtuous karma. So in the white half you see the people are all facing up, they're all going up. So it represents basically that negative karma, when we create negative karma, it leads us into lower rebirth. So the beings going down there represents them going into the lower realms. So and into, basically more painful, more afflicted, more destructive, more difficult states of existence. So it can be just in this life, but here we're talking mostly about future lives, about rebirth. So it's by engaging in non-virtuous actions like killing, stealing, sexual misconduct or adultery, lying and slander, and so forth. Then we create, because those actions are harmful to others and harmful to us as well, then, but especially because they're harmful to other sentient beings, we create harm. So that harm, it comes back to us in the form of our own karma ripening back upon us. So when we engage in actions which are harmful to others, those are non-virtuous actions. So those lead us into lower rebirths. So rebirth as an animal or a hungry ghost, and then the lowest as a hell being. So that's what that dark shaded half represents, creating negative karmas through the force of ignorance, attachment, and anger, and that leading us into lower states of existence, or more painful states of existence in the lower realms. And then the white half represents that also through the force of ignorance, especially, and attachment as well. Even possible anger, we can also engage in virtuous actions, so actions which are beneficial to ourselves and beneficial to others, like taking vows, or holding vows, or practicing generosity, or taking a vow not to kill, not to steal, and then keeping that vow. So even though that's a good thing to do, still we do so under the influence of an exaggerated sense of self, and maybe even through the influence of attachment. So those, and then like helping others, doing things to benefit others, ourselves, or conscientiously practicing, leading an ethical life and refraining from lying, killing, stealing, and so forth. Then we create virtuous karma, and that virtuous karma leads us up into higher states of existence, as rebirth, as a human being, or God or demigod. So that's what that circle represents. And then the okay, so then just outside that, the next circle outside that, you see this is very elaborate kind of diagram of the 6 realms. So I just mentioned what each of those were yesterday, but why don't we start from the lowest ones and go up. So start down at 6 o'clock. So yeah, I can't describe every single drawing in there. It's very detailed, but basically that is the 2 hells. There's a hot hell, is on the left with all the flames. There's a lot of flames and people burning. And then there's a cold hell on the right, where there's like ice and people freezing to death. And then there's like the kind of the minions of hell, the sort of there's these guys with their horns on their head and holding pitchforks and spears and so forth. So basically it's representing all the different kind of largely physical suffering that beings experience when they take rebirth in hell. Then the next realm up is to the right at 3 o'clock. So that's the Hungry Ghost realm. So in the Hungry Ghost realm, beings experience extreme, physical suffering of hunger, extreme hunger and thirst, and also just like physical pain in their joints. And it said that the ground there is very like thorny and rocky, and the sun is like cold, and the moon is hot, but it's always too hot or cold, and they can't find food for many years. So the heaviest negative karmas, especially actions done out of anger, but even actions done out of attachment or jealousy or arrogant pride, if they're extremely harmful to others, like torturing others or killing people, torturing people, causing severe pain and suffering to others. Those heaviest karmas, they result in rebirth in hells, and then less heavy negative karmas, again created through anger, attachment, and so forth. They result in rebirth in hungry ghosts, especially extremely strong craving, and greed and craving, said to lead rebirth as a hungry ghost. And then at 9 o'clock, on the left side, at 9 o'clock, is the animal realms. So the suffering of animal realms, then we don't need to explain much. We can see by looking at animals around us. But especially, there's like always the fear of being eaten by other animals. The physical pain of hot and cold, because animals don't have clothes or can't easily find shelter as we can, always out in the elements, and can't as easily find food as we can. So there's more suffering of thirst and hunger. And then for animals who are used by human beings, then there's the suffering of being trapped and controlled and oppressed, used and abused and slaughtered by owners, by human beings. So those are all the suffering of the animal realms. So those 3 are the 3 lower realms. So it's primarily through non-virtuous actions, which arise primarily through ignorance of the law of cause and effect, right? So not knowing that non-virtuous actions lead to suffering, then we engage in actions like killing and stealing, lying, abusing others, oppressing others, physically or mentally, harming others intentionally, because of ignorance and not understanding how our own actions actually lead to results for us, right? So it's primarily through ignorance of the law of cause and effect that we engage in actions, in non-virtuous actions, which lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And then, whereas it's primarily through ignorance of self and the way we exist, not of the law of cause and effect, but ignorance grasping at a truly existent self, then we engage in virtuous actions, which lead to rebirth in the higher realms. So the two upper realms are the human realms and the God realms. It's just 5 here, but you can divide the God realms into 2. There's the demigods and the gods. So they're kind of less powerful and more powerful gods. But at about 1, 2 o'clock, then is the human realm. So we know all the experience of the human realms because we're humans. And then the God realm, they have, compared to humans, they have more ease, greater ease. So they don't need to to work at like a 9-to-5 job to earn money and go searching for food and things. They kind of very easily come by sustenance. Their lives are much longer, and they have much greater physical enjoyment. So it's said that in the God realms it's very difficult to practice Dharma because there's so much enjoyment and so little suffering that there's very little interest in learning how to be free from suffering or how to be free from samsara, what samsara is. Again, in relation to taking rebirth in these realms and the kind of karma, so there's in this context, there's 3 main kinds of karma we need to understand. So there's, a fundamental division into non-virtuous karma and virtuous karma, right? So again, I've already explained this, but non-virtuous karma leads to rebirth in the lower realms, and then virtuous karma leads to rebirth in the upper realms. But within virtuous karma, there's 2 kinds. There's what's called just meritorious karma, which primarily leads to rebirth in the desire realm. So it means as a human being or as a god of the desire realm. And then there's another kind of karma called another kind of virtuous karma called immovable karma or unchangeable karma. Unchangeable or immovable karma. So that's a very specific kind of karma created through generating very high states of meditative equipoise, of meditative concentration. So you generate these very high, subtle levels of concentration, which are equivalent to the mental concentrations of these kind of gods, not of the desire realm, right? Of the form and formless realms, it's called. So the main thing is that we can generate levels of concentration such that we experience sort of the bliss of the stillness of the mind, a great sense of joy and peace and bliss that comes with the mind being extremely still. And that bliss, that sense of bliss and joy is something much more like incredibly much more enjoyable than anything we experience in the desire realm, anything we experience as human beings. Like as human beings, one of those most powerful senses of like physical bliss or joy, it can be, depends, but joy we experience is through sexual contact, right? Or maybe also through love and affection for family and friends, kind of those 2 things. But compared to the bliss and joy of these high levels of concentration, that's just like nothing. It's like actually it's unenjoyable. So through generating these very subtle levels of concentration, then the human beings even, can then take rebirth in these form and formless realms, so that they're not part of the desire realm, because all the most enjoyable things of the desire realm are kind of paltry in comparison to the sort of satisfaction that is enjoyed in that realm. But those levels of concentration are still part of samsara, so they still arise on the basis of ignorance, and that kind of rebirth still exists through the force of afflictive karma. And so the energy which propels that kind of rebirth eventually comes to an end, and then beings die away from those form and formless realms, and then take rebirth again in the lower realms. So they go up and down. So as I was explaining yesterday, that's another reason for it being a circle, is there's no upward trajectory here. It's like you can go up and down. You know, in one life you can be a human, the next life you can be an animal, then the next life, you know, you could be in hell, next life you could be in a Deva realm. And then from a Deva realm you can again fall down to, you know, fall down to hell or fall down to animal realm, and up and down, up and down, up and down, with no fixed direction. And no like underlying purpose to taking rebirth in those realms, other than we create the causes to take from life to life. We create the causes to take rebirth in different realms. Yeah. So maybe, are there any questions so far? Discuss those three circles. Yes.
I'm just curious. The God realm
Mm-hmm.
can go to the hell realm.
How can a God realm go to a hell realm?
Oh, okay. That's good.
No, you're saying how though, right?
Yeah, I really
Yeah.
was wondering, since they aren't capable like in the human realm to really, because everything's so easy and so forth. How are they creating negativity?
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. So in the God realm, it's probably not the case that they create much negative karma, but they're using up a lot of positive karma. No, because to have that kind of privileged existence, you know, where you don't need to work hard for anything, all, you know, your clothing and shelter and sustenance, your food, all comes very easily, and you just experience pleasure like all the time. That all is the result of positive karma created in the past. So they're using up a lot of positive karma, well, then when that positive karma is exhausted, then what's left is negative karma to ripen. So then, as they're dying, then through the force of attachment to that, you know, to that realm, and maybe regret or, you know, anger, resentment, then they fall from the God realm down to the lower realms. It's said like the gods of the desire realm, they have, I mean, their bodies just naturally radiate light throughout their life. They have a very youthful appearance. They have like garlands of flowers and very kind of beautiful clothing, and, you know, and a lot of friends, and a very fragrant smell to their body. But then in just a week before they die, in a God week before they die, that their body begins to lose its luster, and they begin to lose the fragrant smell and have a foul smell, and their flower garlands and raiments, their clothing, all kind of disintegrates and falls away, and then they generate sort of resentment. So through the force of that, then negative karmas that they've created in the past. Because when we take whatever karma throws our next life, it doesn't have to be created in this life, right? We have, because we've had infinite past lives, right? So we have to think on a much larger scale than we usually think on. In the scale of having infinite past lives, we've created karmas in all those lives. And in each life, we create many different karmas. Like we do some very nice things and we do some very cruel things, right? So, but go on with your doubts. You shouldn't be skeptical. Ask questions. It's good.
All right, so if you're accumulating merit in this lifetime,
Mhm.
you know, whatever, and meditative concentration, as you pointed out, it may not necessarily be the path to enlightenment. It could be you're going to get into this God realm, which seems fine at the time, but you're going to realize it disintegrates.
Exactly. That,
So
yeah.
that's possible that even, so how do you,
Yeah.
so knowing how to direct your practice might be important.
No,
I
it's-
never thought of that,
Yeah, it's very important. Yeah, that's true. Exactly. What you're saying is a huge danger on the path.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, like, well, that's why, like, there's many Buddhist prayers where it's, I mean, the words of the prayer, you pray not to be distracted by or caught up in the bliss of samsara, right? Because it's a big trap. Because the bliss of samsara is referring mostly to the bliss of these God realms, where through very virtuous karma you can take rebirth in these very blissful states, and you spend years and years, you know, and many lifetimes in these very blissful states, and you're not doing anything to go towards enlightenment. You're just using up. And I mean, there's even, I mean, another danger is that you can get, you know, you can generate a very profound level of concentration and take rebirth through that, and for you know, thousands of years, for eons, just experience perfect peace and think you've achieved liberation from samsara, to mistake that for liberation from samsara. And then after eons, then that the karma to experience that comes to an end. And then you see that you're dying away from that realm, that existence is coming to an end. And then to generate the wrong view that liberation from samsara is impossible, right? Which is it's a very heavy wrong view. And through the force of that, take rebirth in hell, and then be in hell for a long time. So yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls. They're like, it's like you're trying to go down a river, but there's a lot of big eddies where you can just swirl around for days and years and lifetimes. So that's the importance of studying this kind of thing, like what are the different kinds of existence in samsara, and how do we get in and get out of those, and why are those not liberation from samsara? Like, how is it that you actually achieve liberation from samsara? Yes?
Will there be a time where everyone will be liberated from samsara, or does this go on indefinitely?
Well, it's kind of both. It kind of goes on indefinitely, but because every sentient being has the potential to achieve total liberation from samsara and full enlightenment, then eventually, the causes and conditions will come together that each sentient being does achieve liberation from samsara. Like, each one of us has the potential to achieve liberation from samsara. And eventually, and it's the same with every animal, every human being, every hell being, every hungry ghost. So eventually each of them will, you can say. But when is like infinitely, far in the future. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you talk about conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you create the causes, you're also creating conditions, right?
Yeah, causes and conditions are synonyms, but causes refer to more like the main causes, and conditions are more like the contributing causes. Not the main
So you
causes.
create them at the same time?
Yeah. Causes and conditions we create at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same amount of causes you create is the same amount, equal the same amount of conditions?
Yeah. When we create causes for something, we're also creating conditions. Any cause is a condition. Any condition is also a cause. But the reason we have two different terms is there's, like I was talking about growing corn yesterday. If we grow a corn plant, then, like the corn seed, the soil, the moisture in the soil, the warmth of the sun, being free from being eaten by crows or something, those are all causes and they're all conditions. But like, which is the main cause for the corn? Of those, like the seed, the soil, the moisture in the soil, the sunlight, being protected from being eaten by crows or something. Which is
The
the
seed?
main? Yeah, the seed's the main cause, because that's what actually becomes the corn plant. Right?
Yeah.
So the seed is really what you speak of as the cause, and the others are contributing conditions.
Yeah.
But they're all causes and they're all conditions in a way.
Yeah, but
Right.
the example like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you have a seed,
Yeah.
and then you plant the seed, and then
Yeah.
there's no rain,
Yeah.
no whatever, or there's no rain and whatever, but you
Yeah.
still have the cause.
Yeah, or there's some like oil in the earth or salt in the ground or something.
So that means we have the causes,
Mhm.
we don't have the condition.
Yeah, so that means there's a cause, but the cause, it can't, the main cause for the potential corn plant is there, but it can't ripen, it can't manifest, it can't actualize its potential result because the conditions are absent. Yeah, exactly. That's why it's important to distinguish between the main one and the other conditions.
Yeah. So let's say,
But like if we have the seed there and there's soil but there's no moisture, then the seed won't grow, right? So then we would say, well, the cause of the corn plant is there, but the conditions are absent. Whereas if we just had a piece of land where there's soil and moisture and nothing eating it, the conditions for a corn plant are there, but we would say the cause is not there, right? Because the seed is not there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say like,
So you need both.
so let's say like from beginning this time I've created so many conditions, right?
Yeah.
So do we have to overcome all those conditions in order to achieve Buddhahood?
You mean conditions for what?
Like suffering, which
beginning
causes
also.
us to suffer.
Yeah.
So I've created, let's say all energies are here, there.
Yeah.
So do we have to overcome all those stuff in
Yeah.
order to achieve Buddhahood?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah. So from beginningless time, we've achieved so many causes and conditions to take rebirth in all these different realms within samsara, again and again and again.
Yeah.
We have infinite. So yeah. So the question is, do we have to overcome all of those in order to get freedom from samsara, to achieve freedom from samsara? Because it seems almost impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me come back to your question. It's a very good cliffhanger, kind of. And that's what actually we'll understand by discussing 12 links.
Yeah.
So I don't want to kind of, if I answer your question, then I give away like the grand finale, kind of. So yeah, we'll come back to it. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
The last one where you mentioned fire and ice.
Yeah, the hell in the hell realms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What exactly is that? I didn't get it.
Well, it's the hell realms. So in the hell realms, there's hot hells and cold hells.
Like hell, like in
Hell, yeah, like
okay.
it's just like just like the Christian hell or the Hindu hell or the Muslim hell. It's interesting actually that all the major religions of the world, they all assert the existence of a hell.
Yeah.
You know, before they really had much contact with each other, I think. But yeah, what hell is it's probably not a physical place. You know, it's interesting. Like, where do these realms exist? We can see the human realm. We know that exists. We can see the animal realm. We know that exists. But like, where are the hells? Where are the Deva realms? Where are the hungry ghosts? Why can't we see them if they exist? You know, it's a big problem actually. If they really exist, why can't we see them? Well, so it's like this. It's like kind of like ghosts or spirits. I mean, do you think they exist or not? It's a similar question. And if they exist, we should be able to see them. But sometimes we can see things, anomalous things happen, that it's difficult to explain why those things happen just based on what we can see. So then, yeah, sometimes it seems like evidence that there are other beings that exist that we can't see, right? But so that's how these realms exist. It's because of, so the Buddhist explanation is because of karma. We have the karma to perceive the human realm, and the animal realm is similar enough that we have the karma to perceive the animal realm. Right? We can see that also. But because the karma of the beings and the nature of like the hell realms, the hungry ghost, and the Deva realms are so different, completely different from the kind of human existence we experience, that we're unable to perceive it. It's something more subtle or just totally different from our kind of experience. So it's not something that we can see with our five senses based on a human body, right? But yeah, it's something that perhaps if we develop our mind to a much more subtle level, then it's said that it's possible to perceive, like with clairvoyance. You know, just like now we can't know what's going on, say in like a far distant place, like New York City. You know, it's not like we can just kind of hover above New York City and look down and see what's going on in Times Square. But there's evidence that some people can do those kind of things. People with like that know how to do dowsing very well. There's kind of dowsing or clairvoyance that they can, or something called distant viewing. I mean, and these are things even like the National Security Agency and the Navy and the military, different members of the military invest. There was this famous guy named Joe McConnell, who during the Cold War, I think it was the Air Force then, they trained people to try to generate clairvoyance. And they trained this guy. If you want to read about this guy, you should look at this book by, what's it called? Extraordinary Knowing. There's a book called Extraordinary Knowing. Very excellent book. By a psychologist in California who was a great skeptic about all these psi phenomena, especially clairvoyance. But then she had an experience of her daughter losing a really rare and expensive cello. And then someone, she tried all kinds of ways to try to get it back. I mean, it was stolen from a theater. She tried all kinds of ways to get it back, and then someone suggested, well, if you're really desperate, you try this guy in Arkansas who is clairvoyant and does dowsing, but remote dowsing, which I never heard of until I read this book. But so she contacted the guy, and the guy told her, well, send me a map of the area where you think it is. So she lived in Oakland, so she sent a map of Oakland. And then he told her, well, he gave her an address where it is. So how does she, you can't just go to the door of this house and knock on the door and say, do you have my cello, right? So what the woman did, she made like little signs that say, look, I know that this stolen cello is in this neighborhood. If you have any, like, I don't want to press charges. If you have any information, there's a reward, and I just want the cello back, and I'll give you some money for it. So then it happened that a neighbor of the guy living next to the house, he saw his neighbor bring the cello in, so he called her up and made contact. And then through him, she said, just leave it in this place. And long and short is, she got the cello back. It was in that place. So then she's left with the question, like, how could that guy in Arkansas possibly know that my cello is at this address in Oakland, right? So then that led her into, she's a professional psychologist. She was president of the American Association of Psychology or something for some years. Very mainstream and very materialistic kind of, materialist outlook kind of psychologist. But this really shook her worldview so much that then she started looking into all these paranormal phenomena. So one of them, she describes her whole kind of research in this book, Extraordinary Knowing. What's her name? Elizabeth? I don't remember. Anyway, I know that's the name of the book. But she describes because this stuff, this research is declassified now on public record, but so the military used this guy, he's I don't know what rank, but used him to go, so he would lay on a bed in California, and then just try to see what's going on in Russia. They would give him satellite photos of like a military installation, and he could like, it's kind of like he could put his mind in that place and then see what's going on in a warehouse even, and he drew, and then he would draw pictures of like what he saw. So like one of the things he predicted existing was this huge submarine, like much bigger nuclear submarine with nuclear missiles and warheads. Well, missiles with nuclear warheads. He drew a picture of it, and the number, he drew like 8 silos. Drew the number of silos and the rough dimensions. And later that's verified by spies in Russia. So there's we're getting at, well, how do the hell realms exist, right? So this relates because, what's my link? Alain, I was saying, for example, we don't have that kind of capacity, right? We don't, I don't know. I don't have that kind of capacity to be able to see, like, with clairvoyance, what's going on in a distant place, or what might be happening in the future, or even what you're thinking, right? But it seems that some people do, right? So why is there that difference? It seems to be some kind of difference in the subtlety of what we're able to perceive, right? So this difference between like the human realm and the hell realm is just it's on the same scale, but it's much greater. It's like there's a huge difference in what we're able to perceive. As human beings, we can perceive the human realm and the animal realm, but this kind of karma that leads a person to exist in this sort of hellish state is so different that I think we just can't perceive it. And also, I tend to think the hell realms, it's not a physical place, maybe, like we experience. I'm not sure if, it could be just like a really bad nightmare that lasts for a long time, It could just be an experience that someone has completely in their own mind. Like when we have dreams, we create a whole world. There's a whole environment, there's sounds, there are other people, there's conversations, there can be chases, and all kinds of things happen in a dream. But that whole environment is created by our mind, right? It has no external reality at all. Because if it did, then other people should be able to see it and know what's going on with it. But so it could be that hell realm is just something experienced by one individual, and it seems like a whole world, but all that whole world is just a projection of forces within their own mind. Or it could be that the hell realm is like people who have the similar kind of karma to experience that they all experience that kind of place together. And it might not have any physical reality any more than like Earth does, right? So and so it'd be the same with the hungry ghost and the God realm. So those are some ways to kind of think about it, how it exists. Yeah.
And also,
Mhm.
you said this person's face that's dead. Right?
Oh yeah.
And then I see the lower body. That's the body of a tiger, right?
Well, he's wearing a tiger skin. It's not that he's a tiger, it's he's wearing a tiger skin. That's a common symbolism in ancient Indian kind of, I don't know, mythology in a way, is that it's a sign of strength and power. Like, because the tiger would be like the most powerful animal in the forest. I mean, they can kill any animal in the forest. So then if you're wearing a tiger's skin, it shows you're even more powerful than that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, you know, like, it's just symbolizing like no matter how like physically strong we are, it's impossible to escape death. Like, or even mentally strong. Well, mentally strong is a different thing, because that's what we're working on. But no matter how much wealth you have, or no matter how much physical strength you have, no matter how good of medicines you have, no matter how famous or powerful you are, like you can't. Your death is more powerful than you. Like death will overcome you. So that's why he's wearing a tiger skin. Yeah. Good question. Other questions? Yeah.
Trying to formulate a question about sort of looking for the self on a subtle level. There can clearly be these gross misunderstandings of this body, these thoughts.
Yeah.
We maybe can look and see that these things are manifesting and changing within some sort of, call it space or mind or luminosity.
Yeah.
But how do I put this? Like if you considered all these things as things, objects in a room, let's say, there does, clearly seem to be some boundary. Like I don't have access to your sight, your senses, your thoughts.
Yeah. True.
So there does, though we can't, point to, a self in there, there does seem to be this boundary, that we don't have access to the outside, to other beings, sensations, experiences, etc.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah. No, there are individual, like you're an individual, I'm an individual. We are different persons.
Right.
There is a self. But see, it becomes very confusing in Buddhist terminology, because often they use the term self as the object of negation, as something that's being refuted. But actually there is a merely imputed self. So basically, what the kind of person or self the Buddhists Buddhists accept as existing is on the basis of all this collection of parts, our body and mind, which are continually changing. We label person, we label I. And it's through the force of that mental imputation, through the force of labeling like that, that I exists. But there's nothing more than that. So it's merely to the force of that imputation. Just like, like what, were we in Fairfax now? Or? Yeah. So where is Fairfax? Like what is Fairfax? The town, or Washington, D.C., for instance. Like what is Washington, D.C.? You can't point to one thing specifically and say, I've got it, this is Washington, D.C. Rather, it's a whole collection of buildings and roads and administration and taxpayers and population, a whole collection of things, none of which is the whole. And then there's a boundary, but just that boundary is not Washington, D.C. And then there's land, but just the land is not Washington, D.C. So there's a whole collection of things, none of which is Washington, D.C., but Washington, D.C. exists because we have the concept, we define it somehow. And that defining, it comes from our mind. It's not like the boundary of Washington, D.C. was fixed like naturally somehow. It's something that is man-made and something that exists like as a product of our perception in a way, our concepts. Right? So we label Washington, D.C. on this collection of things, and it does exist, but it exists independent upon labeling. And there's no more fundamental level of existence than that. Right? And everything exists like that, right? So, But that's not how we ordinarily perceive things. We ordinarily perceive things as being something much more concrete, as being independent from our concepts, independent from labeling, and just being real, existing out there, including ourself. I mean, the main place to look is ourself, because we're most closely associated with that. Yeah. Why don't we, let's look at let's begin looking at the 12 links, the actual 12 links. Otherwise, I'm afraid we won't get through them before we finish this afternoon. Should I do that or go to the quotations? Yeah, let's look at the first 12 links, and then I'll bring in some quotations. So we begin at just to the right of 12 o'clock, towards 1 o'clock, between 12 and 1 o'clock. So you see there's an image of a blind man with a staff. It's an image of a blind person with a staff walking. So this image represents, his being blind represents his not seeing the truth, represents ignorance. So the first of the 12 links is ignorance. So maybe it might help you to be able to refer to, just to be able to get the 12 straight. Look on the back of your sheet of paper. They're listed there. So in the middle of the page, there's, in the bold print, there are the 12, the names of the 12 links of dependent arising. Okay. So the first there is ignorance, avidya in Sanskrit, represented by a blind man. Okay. So that ignorance, again, represents not seeing the reality of how the self exists, not seeing that the self, what we are as a person, is something merely labeled, existing independence upon imputation, which is merely labeled upon a collection of aggregates, of our body and mind. But we grasp that our self is existing something more concrete than that. Right? So that kind of grasping at a reified sense, or concrete sense of I, then, as I explained earlier, it gives rise to attachment and anger, and all the other afflictive emotions. So an afflictive emotion is something that is by nature disturbing, and when it arises in our mental continuum, it disturbs our state of mind. It gives a sense of dis-ease. So you think like, you can think of examples, like anger is an obvious example. When we're really angry at someone, we can't enjoy like eating, we can't sleep, we can't think about things clearly, we feel very agitated. Or on the other side, like when we feel maybe we're really strongly craving to be with someone, or to get a promotion, or to be able to go to some party, or to get something, right? When we're really strongly craving to get something, also there's a sense of like dissatisfaction. There's not a sense of peace, but rather that craving, it destroys the peace in our mind, so that we feel like disturbed as long as we can't talk to that person, or be with that person, or get that thing that we want, right? So you can see, in those two examples, you see how afflictive emotions are something that by nature, when they arise, that they're in the nature of disturbing, and they disturb our mental continuum, our mental peace. So it's through ignorance, and then attachment and anger, then we engage in all the karmas. We create karmic actions, right? Both virtuous and non-virtuous. So that is represented by this potter. The second illustration is of a potter, and he's creating clay pots. So the symbolism there is that he's creating like these containers, because containers, they're like, how is karma like containers? It's like each individual karmic action, it has a certain, it like contains a certain energy to create a future result, right? Just as, a potter making pots. So just as each time you make a pot, it's like it has a potential to store something, which then can be used in the future. When we do a karmic action, like we, lie to someone, or betray someone, betray the trust of someone, or on the other side, when we when it's difficult, we really practice honest. We be honest anyway, or we refrain from, even though it might be easy and convenient, we refrain from, stealing something from someone, or misreporting our hours at work, or something like that. We practice honesty and practice protecting the possessions of others. That's an example of, we create a virtuous karma. So that karma is like a container, in the sense that it contains this energy, which in the future will ripen as a result. Right? Okay. So it's through the force of ignorance, then afflictive emotions arise, emotions. Then through the force of afflictive emotions, we create karmas. And then the next illustration is of consciousness. So here it has a monkey that is like climbing on a house. So, and it says, a playful monkey attracted by objects. This consciousness. But actually, I'm not sure that's very accurate. I looked at another diagram, a different version of the Wheel of Life this morning, And I think it's more common to have a monkey jumping from tree to tree. Another way to illustrate this third link, consciousness, is having a monkey that's like, you know, like monkeys jump from tree to tree, or they swing through the vines, swing on vines from tree to tree. So like that consciousness, so that would represent consciousness moving life to life. Because it's this consciousness, just like a monkey jumps from tree to tree, the consciousness moves from life to life. I'm not sure why they have depicted on a house here, because I don't really understand the symbolism of it. But the importance of this third link is not just any, because we have, you know, 1,001 different kinds of consciousness, but this is specifically two different kinds of consciousness in this third link. So there's the consciousness of at the time of the cause, and the consciousness at the time of the result. So here, consciousness at the time of the cause is the more important one. So this one, it is the consciousness which holds the imprints of all the karmas we create, right? So in short, well, just like, I mean, karma, we talk about karmic actions. So karmic actions are voluntary actions. If we think something involuntarily, we don't create karma. We create karma when we do something intentionally, when we engage in intentional actions. Actually, I mean, the narrow definition of karma is the mental factor of intention. Whenever we have intention, so just thinking something intentionally, we create a mental action, right? Just doing that, we create karma. So even if we, you know, so we get angry at someone and think, you know, I'd love to kill that person, right? Probably we've all grown out of that, but you know, sometimes when we're kids, we think things like that. But just that is a karmic action, right? And on the other side, just thinking, you know, seeing someone who's really sick and just thinking, oh, I wish I could do something to cure, you know, to relieve them of their sickness. That also is a karmic action, right? So our mental actions are something we shouldn't underestimate. But then through having mental intentions, it leads to our verbal actions and also physical actions. So it can lead to us saying, you know, we get angry at someone, then we say something hurtful, or we care about someone, and then we say something very kind and helpful to the person. So those are verbal actions, and we create verbal karmas by doing that, because they're intentional verbal actions, and then also we do physical actions, right? So, okay. So what I want to say, but then, so there's, on the one hand, there's karma, karmic actions of the body, speech, or the mind, and then we talk about imprints of the karma. So imprints are like this, like just like there's imprints of like on the beach. You know, you see people walking on the beach, and some wear shoes, and some are barefoot, and some have big feet, and some have small feet. And you look at the sand, and you can see the imprints of all their feet, you know, on the beach or in the mud in the forest or something. So there's a medium, which is the sand of the beach. There has to be a medium, and then people walk on it, and it's through the force of, you know, their weight that they make an imprint in the sand. So here, consciousness that it's speaking of here, the consciousness at the time of the cause, is like the sand. It's like the medium. And it's something that just like the sand of the beach, or like the beach, it stretches all along, you know, the coast of the ocean for very long ways. This consciousness at the time of the cause, it stretches through time, you know, from life to life. Actually, it goes from life to life. So that's where the symbolism of the monkey jumping from life to life comes in. But anytime we create a karmic action, we put an imprint. Just like stepping on the sand once, you put an imprint on the sand. Anytime we create a virtuous or non-virtuous karmic action, it creates an imprint on our stream of consciousness. So at that time, when we create an imprint, it's called consciousness at the time of the cause, right? Because that imprint is a cause for a later result, which we're going to discuss later. But that imprint is there on the consciousness, and then it stays there until it ripens. So here we come to there's four characteristics of karma. So some of you have studied the Lamrim before, should have heard of these. But karma has four fundamental characteristics, or four important characteristics. So one is that karma is certain. It's certain in the sense that virtuous karmas always produce happy results or pleasant result. Non-virtuous karmas always produce unpleasant result or suffering, right? So in short, virtue always produces happiness, non-virtue always produces suffering, right? So there's a lot of room for debate there, so I'd be happy to hear your questions. But let me get through the four first. So in that way, karma is certain. It's certain that virtue always leads to happiness, non-virtue always leads to suffering. Second, let's see. Well, karma does not disappear. Once you create a karma, then until it ripens or it has been destroyed by an opposite force, it remains. It's just like, so karmas are like seeds in a way. On the one hand, there's imprints of karmas, but on the other hand, karmas are like seeds. So when you put a seed in a storehouse, as long as it's dry and there's nothing to destroy it, the potential for that seed has the potential to produce a fruit, to produce, to grow into something. So karmas are like that. Once you've created a karma, then, and the imprint has been placed, then that karmic seed, it doesn't just disappear on its own. It's not like it gets old and just fades away, but it remains there until it ripens, or until it's destroyed by an opposite force. So destroyed by an opposite force means like, there's, well, kind of two sides to the story. So on the one hand, like, let's look at the bright side. Well, let's look at the bright side last. Look at the bad side first. I want to leave you with a good impression. Right? So, like if even though we do very virtuous things, say say our mother is bedridden and we go and make food for her and clean the house and help her out for a few days or something. So it's very virtuous, very good thing to do. But then say like a couple days later, we get in an argument with our mother and get really angry, really angry with her. Then the anger destroys so much of the karma we created, the positive karma we create. So that's one of the worst things about anger, is it destroys the seeds of virtuous karmas, right? So that's one way karma can, so the seeds, so we do something virtuous and then before we dedicate, then we get angry right afterwards or generate some other really strong afflictive emotion right afterwards. It has the power to destroy that virtuous karma. So it doesn't mean automatically it just disappears, but if we generate like mild anger, it just becomes weaker. If we get like incredibly, violently angry, it has the power to totally eliminate the ability of that karma to produce a happy result.
How?
Huh?
How?
Is difficult, How does it do that?
How does that karma destroy another karma?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't really have a very clear answer that I can give like in the time we have, but let me think about it. Maybe I can formulate a good answer for this afternoon. Because it's a very difficult one. And then the opposite side of the story is that when we create negative karmas, like killing or stealing or lying and so forth, when we harm ourselves or harm others, then it's possible to purify those negative karmas by engaging in very virtuous actions, right? Extremely virtuous actions, by meditating on emptiness, meditating on loving kindness, saying, and then there's certain mantras, like Vajrasattva mantra is a very common mantra of purification, or doing other kind of purification practices. But the main thing, with applying the four opponent powers, the main one of which is generating regret for the non-virtuous actions we've done before, and then engaging in some positive action to counteract that. So it said that by doing that, then we can purify non-virtuous karmas, and then we can either weaken or totally eliminate their ability to result in future suffering. Okay, so the four characteristics of karma, we've only covered the first two. So karma is certain, karma does not diminish, it doesn't disappear. So once we've created it, it will definitely ripen, unless it's destroyed by some opposite force. And then karma, the results of karma are much greater than the cause. So even if we do a small virtuous action, as long as it's not destroyed by anger or something, then in the future the result will be, say we Yeah, like I'll stick with the example of helping out someone when they're sick. Then, and then as long as that karma we create is not destroyed, then in the future we can experience some much greater result. Like many times, other people help us out when we're sick, for example, or as a result of helping someone when they're sick, then we receive medicine and assistance that we need, in future lives, many times, right? So it said that and again, if you ask how, like, I don't know. This one I don't know. And then the last one, so the effects are much greater than the cause. And then the last one, you cannot experience the results of karma that you yourself don't create, right? That's the last characteristic. So if you don't create like a virtuous or non-virtuous karma, it's impossible for you to experience the result. Like, we don't experience the results of each other's karma as a karmically like fruitional result. But of course, like, we experience each other just in an ordinary way. Like some people, very nice people, some very, unfriendly, friendly or unfriendly people. We experience, in the inanimate environment and other people based on their character, but that's not primarily like a result of our karma. Our karma primarily determines like how we experience that person, how we're if we have painful or pleasant or neutral feelings in relation to different things that arise. Okay, so all of those karmas then they put imprints on the consciousness. So at the time that they put imprints on the consciousness, that consciousness, which is the medium for the imprints, is called the consciousness at the time of the cause. And then later, when those imprints ripen, then that consciousness is called consciousness at the time of the result. So those first three links, they go together as one group. So they're called the projecting links, right? So those three. So here, when we talk in this case, when we're talking about karma here, we're not talking about all the different karmas we create. We're primarily talking about karmas that have the power to throw a rebirth, right? Because this whole chain is about how we take rebirth. So not every karma we create has the power to throw a rebirth. Only the most powerful karmas we create have the power to throw a complete rebirth or a life, a kind of existence as a person in a certain realm. Okay, so then the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next 5 links all go together in one group, and they're called the projecting effects, right? So the first 3 are the projecting causes, or the projecting factors. They're what project a life, and then the next 5 are the effects of those causes. So they're what's projected in that future life. Okay. Okay. So the next link is called the link of name and form. That's the label I'm using in the back. Yeah, name and form. And it is 2 men in a boat. So you see there's 1 man rowing and 2 men being carried. So it's really the 2 men being carried that's being talked about, the 2 men in the boat. So just as a boat goes from like one shore to another shore. If you're crossing a river or crossing a lake, you start at one shore, then you cross the body of water and go to another shore. So here, the 2 men in the boat represents basically name and form arriving at the far shore, you could say. So the name and form here, form represent, the name and form refer to our aggregates, what makes us up as a person. So form is referring to our physical aggregate, our body, and then the name refers to our the other 4 aggregates, which are primarily mental aggregates. So aggregate of feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So the reason these are effects is because when we take rebirth, at the moment of conception, or at the moment when consciousness enters the sperm and egg at the time of conception, then at that time, at that very first moment when those three come together, stream of consciousness from a previous life, and then the egg from the mother and sperm from the father, when they come together, in that first moment, then a being is created. That's the first moment of, the person. We think of like a human rebirth. That's the first moment in which the person is created, a person of that life. So at that time, they have a physical body, which is the form, and then they have a consciousness. They have a mind. So that's what's referred to as the mind. And they have feelings. Discrimination, yeah, it's difficult to say what level of discrimination might be present. But then there is compositional factors. They have imprints of karma from previous life. And there is a stream of consciousness. So that name and form is the product of the ignorance, the karma, or what do we call it here? Conditioned or formative actions, and the consciousness at the time of the cause which preceded it. Right? And there can be many lifetimes between the third and the fourth link. Right? So between the time that we create a karma and a karmic imprint is planted in the consciousness, to the time that that imprint ripens as a rebirth, there can be hundreds of lifetimes between. So we'll come back to how that karmic imprint is ripened later with the 8th, 9th, and 10th link. Okay. So now let's go through these 5 first. So there's name and form. So name and form happens at the very first moment of rebirth. And then the next 4 links are all about the development of the embryo and the development of the person's ability to experience the external world, right? Because of course at the first moment of conception, we don't have eyes, we don't have ears, we don't have nose, we don't have tongue, so we can't experience the external world. And also we don't have the ability to recognize what causes us to have different feelings. Okay, so the next link is, let's see, the 6 sense spheres. Yeah. So name and form, and then the 6 sense spheres. So the 6 sense spheres, well, we have 5 senses, right? The eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body sense. So those are all they're represented here by houses with windows and doors, right? So there's, in the description here it says there's 5 windows and 1 door, meaning that, so those are you imagine a person is in a house and has 5 windows and 1 door, and they see things, different things out each of the windows. So like that, we experience things through each of our 5 senses differently. But the main thing we experience things with is our mental sense. So the mental sense is represented, the mental sense sphere is represented by the door. So as the embryo grows, then it develops eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and thereby as the eyes develop, it develops the ability to have visual experience. As the ears develops the ability to have auditory experience, and so forth. So that's those sense spheres which enable us to have experience of different things are what's represented there in their development. And then the next is contact. So the symbol is a man and woman sleeping together. So it represents desire for an object as a couple kissing or making love. So contact means basically like this. So we have, so as the eyes, ears, nose, tongue develop, then they develop the experience to contact objects, right? So as the eyes develop, then we, gradually they develop the ability to see things. So then the visual things we see are the objects, right? So when we have contact with the objects, then we develop, it's on the basis of that we develop aversion or craving, right? So it's through the contact of 3 things. There's the objects, external objects, and then our sense powers, and then consciousness, right? So it's because our eyes develop that then that combines seeing an object, and we have eye sense consciousness, and then we have an experience of seeing. So even if the eyes are there and an object is there, but there's no consciousness, then there's no experience, right? So it has to be the eye consciousness arising in dependence upon the eye sense power, and then there's contact with an object, and then we develop seeing something. On the basis of seeing something, or hearing, or smelling, tasting, and touching, or thinking about. So we have contact with an object, and then the next one is feeling. So feeling is represented by a person with an arrow in his eye, because it's a very painful experience. Sometimes you wonder about the symbolism. Feeling, or desire giving rise to feeling of pleasure or pain, as a man blinded by an arrow in one eye. So here we make contact with things, and we have an experience, and then we have a feeling. Then we generate a feeling of pleasure or pain. So actually, that's only those 4 links. Yeah. Sorry. So it's those 4 links are a group: name and form, the 6 sense spheres, contact, and then feeling. Those 4 go together as one group, and those are that which is projected by the first 3 links. Let me just think through if there's anything else I need to add here. So we've gone through 7 of the 12 links. So we take rebirth, then the sense spheres develop, then we make contact with the object, and then have feeling. Feelings of pleasure, pain, leading to aversion or attachment. Okay, so this is a critical juncture right here between the 7th and the 8th link. Because it's the feelings of pleasure or pain that give rise to different forms of grasping, right? And then and grasping is a kind of desire, basically. There's craving, and then grasping, which is craving is like more mild form of desire. Grasping is a more intensified form of desire, and then those lead to what's called the link of becoming. So becoming. Why don't I just explain link by link? We'll just go through, but then we'll have to come back. Okay, so feeling gives rise to, the next one is a man sitting, drinking alcohol. So that's representing craving, because when you drink something, alcohol, you feel some pleasant sensation, and then you crave to have that sensation again, right? So that's why I call it craving. And then when that craving becomes intensified, then the next is symbolized by a monkey clutching at fruit in a tree. So when this desire for something that we perceive as attractive becomes more intensified, it's called grasping. So we reach out to get things or grab onto things. Not physically, but mentally. It's representing mentally. The mind is more intensely longing for and wanting something. And it's through the force of this kind of grasping, longing for something, that then we start to, so this is at the time we're dying now, then we start to ripen karmas that have been accumulated before. So the next image is of a pregnant woman. So this is the link of becoming, here it's called becoming. It's maturing towards rebirth as a pregnant woman. So here's a pregnant woman representing that, and she's fully pregnant, like in the last trimester, or in like the 8th or the 9th month before giving birth. So here the symbolism is that before we created karma, and that karma put an imprint on the mind, and that imprint has the power to project a rebirth. But it needs conditions, just as a seed needs like moisture and soil and warmth in order to grow into a tree. Then the karmic imprint, it needs to meet with certain conditions before it can produce a next rebirth, right? So first of all, the rebirth that we're in has to come to an end. We have to be dying, and then we have to generate the mind of craving and grasping. So that mind of craving for existence, craving to continue to exist. or craving to continue to exist in the independent, concrete way that we do. So for many ordinary people, they might crave to exist in this body or exist in this identity that we have in this life. So is that kind of, or crave for food or crave for water? It could be as something simple as that, or crave to be with someone. But whatever kind of craving and grasping we generate at the end of life, at the moments we're dying, then that ripens karma, the karmas that we've created in the past. So just like when you have a seed, say to grow a corn plant, and the seed, it's in good soil with fertilizer, manure, and moisture and warmth, then just before, like if you consider the rebirth, the equivalent of rebirth of the plant being when the first shoot comes out of the seed. When a seed, it first grows a root down, right? First grows a root down towards the water, and then grows a shoot up towards the surface. I think. Anyway, but just before it puts out the first shoot, it's like it becomes kind of large and soft, and it's just about to produce the first kind of cells of the shoot. So that's like becoming. Becoming is like the karma. It's kind of fully ripened and just about to produce a rebirth. And then the next link, so that's the link of becoming. And then the next link is a woman giving birth. So that's rebirth. That's the link of rebirth. So that's at the moment of conception. This is not, so here in Buddhism, rebirth happens not at the time we're delivered from the womb, but at the time of conception. So that link of birth, or rebirth, it occurs at the same time as the fourth link of name and form. Those occur simultaneously at the same time. So then the question is, well, why did the Buddha put two different links in vastly different orders that occur at the same time? I'll come back to that. But just know that they occur at the same time. Well, I can give a brief answer now. Remember, the first three links are about creating a karma, and that karma being the imprint being left on the consciousness. Right? There's ignorance, and then compositional fact. What is it called? Formative actions, or anyway, karmic actions, and then the consciousness at the time of the cause. Then remember, I said many lifetimes can pass between that. So then, what determines that in a future lifetime that karma that was placed, that it will ripen? It ripens through the force of craving, grasping, and becoming. Right? So many lifetimes can pass, and then as we're dying, we experience a certain kind of craving and grasping, and then we ripen a karmic imprint, which is becoming, and then we take rebirth. So then, the rebirth, which is a product of one specific karma, there's also simultaneously the link of name and form, which is a product of that karma. So they happen at the same time. So the reason for putting these two links that happen at the same time in different places is to show how different sets of 12 links are interrelated, right? So this is what I'll come back to once I explain all the links and we have a lunch break. We'll come back to how different sets of the 12 links are interrelated, which then they form like a chain leading us in rebirth from life to life to life. Okay. So there's rebirth, and then the last one is aging and death, right? So aging and death doesn't mean like getting old and gray hair and wrinkles and health problems and so forth, but rather from the moment of conception, the very subsequent moment, we begin aging, right? In the second moment of life, we begin aging. So it means we're going towards death, and then eventually, then we'll die away from that life. Okay. So this is briefly the 12 links individually. Then in the afternoon, I'll explain more like how they work as groups and how they interact with each other, and how it's possible to cut the chain of links, to cut the chain so that it stops functioning. And I'll come back to, what's your name?
Fidel.
Vidal.
Fidel.
Fidel.
Yeah.
I'll come back to Fidel's question about, in order to be free from samsara, do you have to eliminate all the karma you've ever created or not? In short, no. But why not and how is a little different. Okay. Any questions? We just have 10 minutes left. Yes.
So the fourth link and the seventh link, name and form and feelings. So you said the fourth link is the 5 aggregates, right?
The fourth link, name and form, yeah, is the 5 aggregates.
So if it's the 5 aggregates and the feeling is in the aggregates, how come there's 2 feelings?
If the name and form, feeling is in the aggregates,
Yeah.
yeah.
How come it comes again on 7?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, how come it comes again on the 7th link? Because the feeling in the 4th link is the feeling at the time of conception. It's just that at the time of conception, and it exists at that time. Whereas the feeling in the 7th link is the feeling that leads to craving, is the feeling like close to the time of death. When the feeling that gives rise to craving and grasping and then becoming and rebirth, right? So they happen at different times, and the reason feeling is repeated again is because it's extremely important. Because feeling it's basically the feelings we have are results of our karma. Like two people eat the same food or drink the same thing or meet the same person, and they have different feelings. Like some they've experienced this feeling very pleasant, and some experience this feeling very unpleasant. And so that is a result of their karma. And then in relation to those feelings, it's how we react. That's why that's an important juncture between feeling and craving. Because that's where it's possible that we can learn to experience feelings without reacting to them. Right? Just seeing them as, just feelings. Like not something I have to, really crave or really get upset about, but just experience as something that's natural, that naturally arises, right? So it's by learning to not be reactive to feelings that we learn to reduce our craving and grasping at feelings, either for them or against them. And then that can help that's one way to break the circle of rebirth, the process of rebirth.
So what's the difference between cessation and feeling?
Between cessation?
Yeah, body sensation and the feelings.
I like body sensation, because the feelings, there's also mental feelings.
Yeah.
Right? Feelings are not always physical.
Yeah.
And we have physical feelings, but then we also have, like when we think about some pleasant thing that we did in the past, there can be a mental feeling, and then a physical feeling also goes along with it. There's a mental sense of, joy or sadness. It's not that the joy and sadness are feelings, but there's a feeling of like an enjoyable mental sensation that can arise. It's not physical. It's not just physical.
So, but those feelings or those sensations, if they don't come from your mind, then they're not feelings.
If they don't come from your mind, then they're
Yeah.
not feelings?
Yeah.
How do you mean?
Meaning that like they're being influenced to arise, right? If they're being influenced to arise,
They've been influenced to rise. Yeah,
by
they've
conditions
been given rise to due to our karma.
and the conditions, right?
Yeah, and the conditions coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that means like they're not real. I mean,
Well, they're
not
real.
real.
Why? Things that arise from causes and conditions are real.
Things that arise from cause condition are real.
Yeah.
But okay.
Like us. I mean, we arise from causes and conditions.
Because like the fourth ones, the one that name and form,
Mm-hmm.
then the 5 aggregates, and then feeling arises. Naturally, right? It just arises, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, it arises through contacting objects.
So like let's say like
Contact
if you
objects.
read everything to the 5 aggregates, right?
Yeah.
Like the 5 name and form.
Yeah.
So that means like the 5 aggregates are permanent, right?
No. They're changing. They're also changing.
Yeah,
I mean, as long as we're a person, we always have those 5 aggregates.
yeah. But the feeling we experience, like let's say like we have like we drink alcohol, or we have like sex, those kind of feelings. They're
Mhm.
they're not real. They don't come from our mind.
They're not real, but they are real. I mean, we experience them. And they don't just come from a mind. They come from interaction of many causes and conditions.
Yeah,
Right?
but they're not feelings or they're sensation, right?
Well, physical sensations you have to kind of distinguish between like the way we use feelings in ordinary
Yeah.
English and the way we're using feelings in this very specific context,
Yeah.
right? So in this Buddhist context, feelings can refer to mental feelings and also physical feelings.
Yeah.
So what we ordinarily talk of as like physical sensations, you can also just talk of as like physical feelings.
Okay.
But what we mean is the physical sensations, yeah, of
Okay.
pleasant or unpleasant.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of just pleasant and unpleasant. But if there's a, like, I have a sensation like, you know, of cold or smooth, right? So just experience, the physical sensation of feeling smooth is not a feeling. The feelings are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
Yeah, that's
So
what
it's the feeling that as pleasant, that's what we mean by feeling, right?
sounds
Yeah, there's sometimes a confusion between the regular, with the way we ordinarily use words in English and the way they're used here. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Other questions? Maybe it's quite complicated stuff, and we've been going for 2 hours now, so maybe if there's no burning question, we take a break. An hour and a half break, right? Yeah, it's 12:30, so we resume at 2. Yeah, so at 2 then, I'll go back and put the links into groups and then explain how different sets of the 12 links kind of interact with each other, and how we experience them over different lifetimes, and where we can cut the whole process of rebirth.
That's where all the questions come.
Hmm?
I said, that's where all the questions come.
Yeah, those are many questions. Okay, so thank you all.